Hello, everybody. Look at that stylish black and white photo of John as he comes on camera. Hey, John, how are you? Well, first, let me welcome everybody to this month's episode of EDU Live. My name is David Sutphen. I'm the host, and for those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is a conversation series we started about 4 or 5 months ago, which just gives a chance to talk about issues of equity, opportunity, access in higher ed and more broadly. And for those of you who've joined us for a couple of the previous episodes, I think you know the kind of broad-ranging conversations I like to have with people who I feel blessed to call as friends. And I feel very fortunate today to be joined by one of those friends, John Rice. I've known John so long, he used to be known as Johnny Rice, but now that he's more official, I'm going to call him John Rice for this conversation. And before I, dive in and, ask John some questions, just want to say that, John has been someone in my professional and social circles who me and my peers have always looked up to because, he was one of the guys who, gave up the great job at Disney and, the NBA after having gone to, Yale and Harvard Business School to do something that, is having just a transformational impact for people's lives. And I'm really excited to welcome him today. He's a wealth of knowledge. And I think you'll appreciate after the conversation, why he's so relevant to, the discussions that I like to have on this show. And just to remind everybody, we're going to set aside some time at the end of the conversation for Q&A. So when we get there, feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we will get to them. And I guess the last thing I would say is as I said, Johnny and I have known each other for a long time. And, one of the other things we share in common is we both have amazing women in our lives. And we both have the benefit of having older sisters who are like total, superstars in politics. So for those of you who don't know, John's older sister is Susan Rice, who's our current domestic policy advisor for President Obama, was national security advisor to President Obama. And my sister Mona worked in the White House. But the difference between me and John is I don't just have one amazing older sister. John has, a wife who's a professional tennis player, traveling the world in the pro circuit over the age of 50. And his daughter is like, I think the top ranked point guard recruit in the country. So he's obviously not intimidated by smart, amazing women in his life. So I know you're just trying to keep up with your family, John, but I know how that feels. So with
it's a
that
losing battle, but I appreciate that. And we both know, what it takes to kind of, fight with your sister for the extra food on the table when you have very, strong personalities in the house who are great people.
Yeah, made us all stronger. So let's start actually, John, with where I started in terms of, you had this great career going in the entertainment and sports world. You were at the NBA after having spent some time at Disney. Like, what made you decide to give that up and to start MLT and pursue what has been a pretty transformational path in building, a nonprofit that's helping so many folks that look like us achieve their both academic and career goals?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation, and it's always a pleasure to mix it up with you and talk about really important issues that are front and center in today's, on the national dialogue today. So I'll start by saying, I think at the core, the impetus, probably goes back to, growing up in Washington, D.C. is, with both my parents were in the public sector. My mom was in the education policy world and was really instrumental to the initial legislation back in the 1970s called Pell Grants that put millions of low-income and minority students in college. And my father was in the government and an economist and worked at the World Bank and the Federal Reserve Board. And so, I kind of felt like that at some point I really wanted to do something that was really focused on societal impact. I didn't know what that was growing up, but I did. I actually thought I figured it out in a general way when I was a second year student at business school, and wrote the initial business plan way back for MLT. It wasn't the best business plan, but it did, it did really focus me on the areas that I wanted to have impact. And when I was a student at Harvard, I kind of looked around the classroom, and I was having a very I would say transformational experience personally. And I looked around and said, why are there so few people of color who are experiencing what I'm experiencing? Why are there so few executives coming to campus to talk and to recruit students and so forth? So I did an initial business plan working with an entrepreneurial management professor named Gregory Dees, and who became one of the leaders in the social entrepreneurship academic world after this. But it really wasn't even a space back then. So we worked on a business plan, kind of saw some white space, and actually, David, I was working nights and weekends while at Disney and at the NBA. On this concept, piloting a number of things. I had one or two people working for me, raised some money, and so really it was just a matter of when I would jump out and take my shot at this, and I finally got to the point where I felt like I had enough experience and some relationships to take a real shot at it. I knew I didn't have what it took to take my best shot at coming out of business school, and 9-10 years in, I felt I was ready, and I'd raised some capital, and I was lucky enough to convince my wife to kind of my new wife at the time, to keep the lights on, pay the bills while I took a shot at this. So that's really I was really focused on it throughout my career. It was just about piecing together the components, and I finally got to the point where I'd gotten to the senior levels of the NBA, and realized that if I spent the next 5 or 10 years there, which I would have been very happy doing and loving, and it probably could easily still be there because it was a great place for me, I probably would regret looking back and saying what could have been, because it was and I knew that that if I took a shot at it, stepped away, rolled the dice, and it failed, that I could go back and get a good job, whether it's at the NBA or somewhere else. So that was really the confidence, and that confidence really started with my mother, who told me, look, who was always pushing me to focus on impact, and always told me, David, that if all else fails, your job, your relationship, X, Y, Z, you can always come home into the little room that you grew up in, right? And that gave me the confidence to believe that I should take my shot at it and roll the dice, and I did.
That's such a great story. And, interestingly, one of the things that struck me in listening to that is everyone that I know who's an entrepreneur, and I'm not one, there's some part of their story that's like, oh, I was working on this even when I had another job, because it was really like that was the passion project. And I often say to people, like, that's when you probably need to be an entrepreneur, if that's the thing that you're thinking about even when you're doing another job. Because if you're not an entrepreneur, that's probably not what's happening. So, obviously it was a shot that paid off. And, you fast forward 17 years almost, and I've always been struck, and John and I had a chance to work together in my previous job, and I had at that point a sense of the impact that MLT was having. But why don't you spend just a couple of minutes giving people a sense of just how many people's lives MLT has touched? Like the percentage of students in business school, students of color, first gen kids who have been touched by MLT, and then maybe a minute or two on kind of what you actually do to support and empower those young professionals as they're thinking about their paths into the business world or social impact or other things.
Sure. So I'll frame it up. And it really, we are a national nonprofit that focuses really on two important levers, in our work to advance racial equity in this country. And those levers are, one, the individual lever, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about that, and then the institutional lever. How do you get organizations to do winning things that support widening the road and enabling all people to take advantage of what are the most important pathways for Americans to achieve economic ability, economic mobility, and financial stability. On the individual side, and maybe I'll start by saying, kind of the larger scope and scale. We're an organization of about close to 200 folks, 200 staff, and and an operating capital base of about $50 million. So we're, a decent sized nonprofit,
Yeah, that's
grown
large.
meaningfully over the past in recent years. But on the individual side, our focus is around expanding economic mobility for low and moderate income Black, Hispanic, and Native American students and professionals, and then helping them, maximize their career trajectory toward the senior to senior level positions of influence and impact. And so we work with about 2,500 students and young professionals a year. Okay, so we're kind of the size of a mid-sized university. Okay, I know you work with universities. We're kind of that scale, and our programming spans early college all the way through the senior executive levels, and it really focuses on the key transition points that historically have been choke points for diverse talent as they transition from college to the workforce, early career back to grad school back out in the working world, mid-career to senior, and so forth. And our orientation, our model, is really to provide kind of high touch, high accountability, sports-like coaching. Okay, along with the high performance playbook, helping decode what that looks like, and help young people understand where they are relative to that high performance bar, and then give them the relationships, the connectivity, the social capital that's so critical to maximize their trajectory. We've worked with 10,000 folks total over the course of the last, 17, 18 years. And then in terms of results, we know, to your point, about 98% of our undergraduates, or largely Pell eligible students, we place in jobs that average, $70K plus starting salary. So that's, immediately, closing the deal on economic mobility for them and their families when you're coming from families of, whose household income is 50K or below. And then if you go to the sort of the graduate school level, over 50% of the Black and Hispanic and Native American MBA students at the top 10 to 20 business schools are graduates of our MBA prep program. We're helping them, prepare for and apply successfully to the top business schools. And then at the mid-career level, almost 80% of the folks the mid-career folks who our corporate partners send to us when they're a year or two from a key promotion transition point, get promoted within a year after going through our mid-career program. So we've really focused on results at the individual level, and we got over 300 folks now who have already gotten to the senior executive level. So it's really about broadening that pipeline of senior executives who have impact across the private, social, and public sectors, and then working early in the pipeline to drive economic mobility and seed that pipeline at the entry level, which is critical coming out of college. And then on the institutional level, just talk just very quickly where we have our orientation is kind of a comprehensive suite of offerings for organizations. We work with about 150 companies, foundations, and so forth that cut across helping them source top diverse talent, helping them retain and advance the talent that they have, as well as advising their senior executive teams on the how-to strategies and tactics of moving the needle on talent, toward critical mass of diverse talent. Really, the tweaks that they need to make in talent as it relates to their talent acquisition and talent management engine, so that they work for people of color the same way they work for their white peers. And then finally, just recently we've actually launched a racial equity certification initiative that builds on the how to how to develop a rigorous approach to move the needle on racial equity, but also provides the recognition of reward for organizations that actually make progress on racial equity in their organizations.
So let's spend a little bit more time on that, because I think I suspect it's fair to assume that in light of everything that happened last summer and the kind of racial reckoning that we went through as a country, and the self-reflection that I think institutions across the spectrum in society, but particularly businesses large and small, started to think about, like, what are we doing, and are we showing up, are we thinking about these issues in the right way? Maybe talk a little bit about how that inflection point in the kind of culture and the conversation has kind of accelerated some of the work, and then maybe a little bit more kind of context on when the Black equity at work. What are some of the dimensions of what that framework emphasizes or focuses on for businesses to be thinking about if they're taking this work seriously?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So let me kind of frame it up a little bit, David, to sort of have a little bit of context, as we head into so what's changed in the last year and why we launched this initiative, this Black Equity Work Initiative. And I think it's important for people to understand, that coming out of the civil rights era in the 60s, the early 70s, when universities and employers opened the door, in terms of access to Black and brown folks. And then there are a number of initiatives related to affirmative action and other diversity initiatives over the past many years. A lot of positive change, but I think what we saw was we created a perception, especially among white people, that really nothing else needed to be done. Now that the doors are open and legal discrimination is no longer discrimination is no longer legal. That it's really up to people of color to figure it out. And I think that that was, and then what you had was the murder of George Floyd, also the incident, the Amy Cooper incident with the bird watcher in Central Park, which is also really important, coming in 1 week last year. And I think both of those incidents show, kind of shine a light on the fact that racism is still alive and well, and we can no longer, deny that we're beyond it. And I think what that did within organizations, in the companies in particular, was heighten their conviction around that they do have a role to play. It isn't just it helped them. It kind of created a little bit of a crack in the narrative of it's people of color's problem, not ours. Okay, they kind of realize now we have a role to play in this, but yet there was still a lot of cloudiness. What do we need to do to move the needle? And I think one of the biggest insights that we gained over the past several years is that, prior to this, was that organizations needed a much more rigorous approach to move the needle on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we decided, look, this is the time to launch this Black Equity at Work initiative that really provides for the first time, a absolute framework, and picture for what good looks like with respect to racially equitable employer practices, akin to the LEED standard, in the environmental sustainability space. And we felt that in order to elevate the rigor with which organizations pursue racial equity, you had to at least ground them in what good looks like, and then it's important to help them understand, that. And I say what good looks like. Let me back up and say that cuts across not just people, people around, representation, with respect to compensation equity, and with respect to the inclusive work environment, but it goes beyond that to how they engage with their suppliers and their business practices, to how they engage in their communities with respect to philanthropy, and what they're doing with community financial institutions and so forth. So create a comprehensive framework, but you also had to create an on-ramp, that was accessible to all organizations, no matter where they are in their journey. And so at the end of the day, we felt it was really important as an on-ramp to make the on-ramp a rigorous racial equity plan built around the framework that we created with the Boston Consulting Group and a bunch of other leading organizations involved. And that on-ramp is really, that allowing organizations to and supporting them in the process of developing a rigorous racial equity plan, and they have the opportunity to get that plan approved based on rigor alone, not where they are, but based on rigor alone, and then gives them 3 years, actually 3+ years, to move the needle and make progress against that plan, and then get rewarded for progress and recognized for that. And so the idea really is to call employers in, not call them out, and to give them the how-to support that's critical. Because what we found was that, as I mentioned, the organizations want to move the needle, but they just don't know how. And building on our insights for the past several years, at MLT, that was really a critical component of why we did it. And we've had, we made tremendous progress. We've got about 40 organizations, and that list is growing, that are across a variety of sectors that signed up. And started this journey in the tech sector, organizations like Amazon and Workday, and healthcare organizations like DaVita and Abbott Labs, and financial services organizations like Moody's and PNC Bank and Bain Capital, BlackRock and so forth, consulting firms like
That's
BCG, Deloitte, and EY, and the big consumer products companies, Nike, Peloton, and others. And even law firms. I know you come from legal background.
Yeah.
Organizations like Gibson Dunn and Arnold Porter. So we really feel that we've got the framework, something that can actually scale at a systems level. Racially equitable employer practices will be expanding it beyond to Latinx as well in the near future. And we think it's really important. I think that that we actually take this time where conviction is high. Okay, to put some stakes in the ground that relate to rigorous approach, accountability, and reward.
It's interesting because when we were, prepping for the conversation, I think one of the things that, a couple of things that we talked about that kind of dovetail with, what we do is, we did some Gallup research earlier this year and found that, when it came to the experiences that students were having in the classroom in our partners' online degree programs, that they were having really kind of equitable experiences and largely having equitable career outcomes. But the places where there were kind of meaningful distinctions with their peers who were white when it came to things like career advancement and earnings potential. And you and I talked a little bit about how intentionality in design is like really critical, whether you're trying to design, a high quality online learning experience, or whether you're trying to design a kind of a work environment where, people have the ability to kind of, kind of persist and move up the ladder. I remember a couple of years ago when we worked together, one of the things that I remember you sharing with me is that it's really important at certain stages and phases in people's careers for there to be a critical mass of folks at each level so that they can be a support infrastructure. So maybe share a few of the kind of practical insights without giving away, obviously, all of your secret sauce of some of those things that you wouldn't necessarily automatically think about, but if you're being intentional around how you're structuring things, they can make an impact. And then I want to pivot for a minute. Yeah. Maybe talk about your perspective, because you sit on the board of trustees of Yale and you work at this organization that's really helping people think about their lifelong learning trajectories and being relevant for careers that are now going to last 40, 50, 60 years.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say, and I think your example of how to design and make a learning experience with intentionality and seeing the the results and how people feel included and is so critical, right? And this is what we're missing, unfortunately, in the vast majority of organizations and even the best organizations. And one of our, I think our key insights from over the years at MLT is that organizations are super well intentioned. They want to do the right thing, but what they haven't been doing is taking a rigorous approach, the same level of rigor that they apply every other part of their business. And I think it's really hard to create an equitable workplace where everyone feels included when you actually don't have you're not really grounded in why you are where we are and what you need to do to move the needle. And I think what you all have done is is very important, because you've unpacked what are the elements of an experience that that actually works for everybody, and you designed around that. And that's what organizations unfortunately are not doing. And let me give you just kind of a perspective on that. And there's a little bit of what I call a doom loop happening in even the best organizations. And I think it starts with, if I could kind of capture it, it starts with them again with the right intentions, but misreading the underlying drivers, the why we are where they are, and it starts with misunderstanding of the kind of the root causes with respect to recruiting and retention, the challenges that they face, the dynamics of the talent marketplace from a recruiting standpoint, and then secondly, how diverse employees experience the workplace different from their white peers. The perception is on the talent acquisition side, it's a pipeline problem. False, not true. On the retention side, they look at data and say, oh, people of color are performing, at lower levels, and they don't, and they figure, oh, it's just we just need to do some more mentoring, and they don't really understand, why the results don't come, and that's also false, so the first thing is misunderstanding the drivers. The second piece is like, how do you not really getting how to move the needle in the world of DEI. There aren't a bunch of great, kind of benchmarks out there, best practices. So if you're not really deep into it, the solutions aren't obvious. And then as a result of those two things, we fail to take the rigorous approach. And let me give you a sense of what I mean by a rigorous approach. If you think about rigor in every other part of our business, whether it's launching a new product, expanding to a new market, it's, what do? We define, we look forward, and we say, okay, what does success look like in 3 to 5 years, qualitatively and quantitatively? And then we say to ourselves, well, what do we need to invest in to make sure that we achieve that definition of success? How do we prioritize those initiatives and those levers? And then we develop and then we look at what are the interim metrics to go from where we are today, that we need to track to what that definition of success is 3 to 5 years down the road. And then we develop an organizational approach so we hold people accountable to driving that progress. When it comes to DEI, we actually don't do any of those things. As I already mentioned, we don't, kind of unpack the why we are where we are, the kind of the root cause. But then, when it comes to defining success in 3 to 5 years, we don't even do it, because conversation around race and gender, and goals and those sort of things are uncomfortable. So we don't define success. And then we don't define success. It's hard to prioritize your investment levers. It's hard to develop interim metrics for progress. And then you can't hold anybody accountable at the end of the day. So what we are kind of left with is strategies and tactical approaches, even in the best organizations, that can really be defined as let's do better than last year, right? Which would never be acceptable in any other part of our businesses. And then when you have a let's do better than last year strategy, then you kind of settle for what I like to call kind of random acts of diversity, right? Think in initiatives that individually look fine on paper and often are, make some sense, but they're not bound in a cohesive strategy. And
they can be fleeting,
so the results
right?
become self-fulfilling prophecy.
And they can be fleeting because a person leaves, or for some odd reason, an initiative just goes away because it's not, it's interesting because that's a good segue into the first question we got from the audience. Obviously, welcome additional questions is, when it comes to the Black equity at work framework and the certification and kind of what does success look like, and from like a proof of efficacy standpoint, can you talk a little bit about some of the metrics that MLT and BCG put together to kind of score and frame that up?
Yeah. So what we've developed is really a framework that has 5 pillars, and I think those 5 pillars cut across 3 areas. Okay, in the 3 areas are people, purchasing, and philanthropy. And so what we look at on the people side, there are 3 components of that. Okay, and that's representation. Okay, and we look at when it comes for Black folks, the actual what is the appropriate representation at all levels of the organization. It's not just board of directors, it's not just 2 boards of directors, but it's really solving for senior management, middle management, all employees, in terms of representation, targeting 10% over time, and then when it gets to compensation equity, it's really having a rigorous approach to make sure that they're eliminating any inequities in terms of compensation based for equal pay for similar jobs, and then actually really critical to that from an employee experience standpoint, from a inclusive work environment standpoint, it is so important that there is to be solving for no delta, no difference in the way people of color, Black people and brown people experience the workplace, relative to their white peers, and that's built around survey data as well. So we have the 3 components around people, and then success around purchasing and relationships with your suppliers, it's really about having an equitable spend, not just overall, spend, but also especially in the higher margin areas, your professional services, your law firms, your accounting firms, and so forth, that are critical for economic activity in our communities, and then critical to actually be spending, to be investing in the communities that you're actually operating in, as relates to a percentage of your pre-tax profits, and also investments of your cash in CDFIs and organizations that are supporting equity, and nonprofit organizations that are supporting equity in our communities. So it's really about a framework that's comprehensive, that cuts across the key areas of equity, and that's built around a multi-year effort to generate progress towards specific goals.
Gotcha. So carrying on that same theme, I have another question that, and I feel like you've gotten at some of this, and I know it's always a little bit reductive sometimes to say, give me the one thing, but like, if you're a company or an organization and you are at the beginning of the journey,
yes,
beyond, obviously potentially calling you and saying, hey, let's talk about your Black equity at work framework, what is the kind of one short-term piece of advice you would say if somebody's in that paralysis mode where they kind of don't know where to start? And then thinking a little bit longer term, obviously the ideal scenario is to have all three of those pillars, but is it more important to start with one of them versus the other? Love your
well, the framework's meant
the
framework's meant to be flexible, so that you make progress across all three areas, and knowing that representation is the one that takes longer to move the needle on. But the most important thing I'd say, David, is in one piece of advice is take a rigorous approach. We start with, and this is where organizations fall short, is they don't do a rigorous assessment of where they are today. Okay, and once you understand how the experience is different for diverse talent, what the dimensions of the talent marketplace looks like outside from a recruiting standpoint, once you're grounded in the facts there, then you can develop a rigorous plan, okay, that allows you, that it cuts across all of these areas, and that puts you in position to, if you're a senior executive, to look you and your team in the eye around the table and say, we are taking our best shot at this. And it's really about moving from a let's do better than last year sort of well-intentioned approach that doesn't have the rigor, to a comprehensive approach to moving the needle, holding ourselves accountable in the process. So it really starts with, and what I say was like, understand the current state, okay? And then based on the current state, develop a rigorous approach, both strategically and tactically, with, just like you do in every other part of your business. And so that begins to translate to executives as, oh, we do this everywhere else. Let's just apply the same framework to DEI. And so it's not, there is work to do, but it's, but the fundamental concept, David, is pretty straightforward, and it's consistent with the same tenets with which all business people kind of grew up in their organizations.
So along those lines, I mean, I know this is true for 2U. I looked at and we should obviously have a conversation about the Black equity at work framework and 2U. And I looked at the dimensions, and I was, some of them were, like I always say to people, no one's great at everything. There are probably areas where you're doing well and areas where there's a lot of room for improvement. But one of the consistent themes I hear in talking to a lot of companies and peers is that almost everyone seems to be struggling with that mid-level management to senior management jump. So I guess, and obviously that in many respects is the sweet spot of the kind of professional that MLT, is kind of working with. What is your perspective on like why that is such a challenging, barrier and structural problem to solve for?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with, the pyramid narrows meaningfully, right? When you go just the numbers, right? Then when you go from middle to senior, right? And it becomes, it becomes more competitive. I mean, you have to be, very candid here, where when you go from middle, when you go from junior to middle, essentially, it's about your performance. It's not so much about your performance relative to others. Okay, when you start to narrow the set of opportunities as you go from middle to senior, it becomes very competitive, and you not only do you need to be a really good performer, but other people are actively competing against you. So those are the dynamics that make it tougher. But I think in any organization, but I think the core here for diverse talent is twofold. Number one is that that organizations, okay, they fundamentally, miss, the experience that diverse talent is having and how that actually affects performance and retention. In other words, we did a study with the Boston Consulting Group and not recently, and found that essentially when they looked at the why consultants of color, okay, at all the top consulting firms, when you normalize for everything on paper, everything from previous work experience, schools they went to, test scores, GMAT, or other kind of standardized test scores, GPA, when they look exactly the same on paper, why were they getting promoted at 1 degree of standard deviation lower than their white peers? And essentially what they found was that there are these root causes that that organizations are missing. And it starts with the fundamental misunderstanding or with the reality that when no matter how talented you are, when you're one of one or one of a few, you're going to have some deficits in that we call that kind of that sense of belonging, that genuine sense of that genuine confidence that you belong. And when you have deficits in that, then that affects how you navigate the organization,
trickle effect,
how you build relationships, your growth mindset, and so forth. And so essentially what you're seeing is that people who look like you and me, no matter how talented they are, when we are one of a few, we are spending like a third of our brain energy on a day-to-day basis twirling around questions in our head. Do I measure up? How are people perceive me? If I make a mistake, does it reflect on everyone else, on all other people of color? And when you're and what happens is, when you're spending 30% of your brain energy on those things, and you're competing against your white peers who are spending 0 to 5% of their brain energy focusing on those things, it's harder to compete, and it's hard to say you have a meritocracy in your organization. And that's what organizations miss. And they also miss that when you're twirling around those questions in your head, whether they're right or wrong, doesn't matter what the answer is. It becomes harder, it becomes a lot harder to jump back on the horse when you have a setback, to respond to the kinds of, well-intentioned constructive feedback that you're getting. And it really affects performance. So at the end of the day, organizations are missing the fact that regardless of where you went to school or what your experience is, race alone has, critically defines how you experience an organization. And then once you understand that, then you can actually model your interventions for people of color in a way that is based on those underlying drivers. And that's what organizations are not doing because they're missing them. So it's critical, for organizations to really focus on both what do we do to provide support for diverse talent, given what I just described, but also do a lot, move from kind of unconscious bias training and general diversity training for white managers, which is kind of focused on what's going through their own heads, okay, and how to make sure that they adjust to an environment that's becoming more diverse, to moving to what we call kind of proximity training, understanding what's going through the heads of people of color, how that's different from what's going through our heads, and then how do you manage and grow people in a much more customized way. And so you got to focus on both the individual and institutional levels of intervention. And that's how, when we see organizations do those two things, then everything changes as it relates to folks making that progress, making that jump from middle to senior management.
Gotcha. Very helpful. I guess, we're getting to the end, and I guess what I want to end on is maybe a comment, thought, just get your reaction to. I mean, as I alluded to earlier in the conversation, we're kind of at this interesting inflection point now in society where, when we were in school, you would go to school, you'd get done with, if you ended up going to graduate school, and you pretty much were done with school for the rest of your life, right? With very rare exceptions. Now, we kind of live in a world where, everyone is going to need to kind of stay on top of honing, developing, refining their skills over a pretty long period of time. And when you think about that reality combined with some of the challenges that MLT has helped solve in the past and help people navigate, like, how do you think about MLT, its mission, lifelong learning, and the role that maybe you can play over time to ensure that even those folks, the 300 that you mentioned who've gotten into senior roles, they're probably not done with the need to, maybe go back self-interestedly, take a 2U powered short course on, how to manage remote teams or women's leadership or you name it. So to maybe talk a little bit about that as a kind of a closing reflection.
Yeah, let me say, I think what you're capturing, and I say this, very candidly, I think speaks to the importance of what 2U does. Okay, and of your work, and matching the needs of individuals, the opportunity, within an educational, context, and even a professional context with the needs of employers, right? And my point is that you have to continue to do that, whether you're in a university setting, okay, from a course design standpoint, the work that you all are expert in, whether you are in a boot camp setting where you're trying to actually build specific skills that match what employers are looking for, which is a huge disconnect in our country, as you well know, for both the college-going community and folks who are not in the, who are not in the college-going community, and then you need to continue to focus on matching, what an individual needs, okay, to grow their career, providing them the kind of, what we call kind of sports-like coaching, which is very different and much more intentional than mentoring, okay, much deeper than mentoring, helping them understand at every level, what does high performance look like? Where do you stand relative to that bar? And what do you need to do to close the gap in terms of skills, in terms of experiences, in terms of relationships? And then surrounding folks, with the kind of, peer community that supports high performance. And you need to continue to do that at the same time, David, that you focus on helping employers, okay, understand understand their, workforces and the distinct segments of them, of their workforces, in a way that goes beyond a one-size-fits-all approach. That's essentially where we've been in the past. And so when it comes to lifelong learning, it's really incumbent upon both, what do you do to support the individual, but it's also how do you help the employers, the folks who have such important pathways for all Americans, how do you help them widen the road in a way that allows that talent to rise to the top? And it needs to be focused on both on both levers, and that's really the work that we try to do at every stage, from the students that we work with who are undergrad to the folks who are the 300 plus who are now in the C-suite or almost there, and with the organizations that they're working with. So
Great.
That's how I would frame it up from a lifelong learning standpoint.
Appreciate that, and appreciate the insights and thoughtfulness that you always bring to these conversations. And I guess what I would say is, I've heard a lot over the last couple of years from, people saying, hey, I don't really know what it takes to support the, employees of color or the Black employees that I have. Well, one of the things that I've always said to John about what he's built at MLT is the insights that John and his team have developed over the last 17 years, working with the exact kind of cohort of young professionals that every company is, trying so desperately to make sense of, is just a rich pool of knowledge and insight. So call John and get engaged with MLT, because not only is it a great source of talent, but I think it will help, you as an organization navigate. And John, I know we've talked about this in the past, and my hope is now, in particular, once our recently announced deal with edX closes, that 2U and MLT can figure out a way to work together and bring the best of what you have and all the insights and knowledge together with our ability to share it with the world, and help you build something that not only expands the impact that you can have, but also potentially creates an opportunity to strengthen your organization in other ways. So thank you for your friendship and all the work that you do. You're an inspiration to us and all of our friends. And with that, it's a wrap, and I will see you soon, man.
Thank you so much.